So, the person that I chose to interview was my grandmother. All of my family lives out of state, so it had to be over the phone. But she actually just turned 95 on October 4th. And she actually was married to my grandfather, who was in the military. I chose her because she is probably one of the most opinionated women that I know. And I know that she will just tell me how it is, and like she'll have a lot to say, like she won't hold back. So, something that we actually discussed involved our class. It was just having to do with active listening. She was telling me about how today active listening is so hard to come by because, one, everybody is so attached to their phones or really like any kind of electronics, and they're not very like present in the conversation, and people really aren't used to having face-to-face conversations anymore. A good example being like online school, which I love, but it's not the best for everybody. Or even just like Zoom calls or just like FaceTiming instead of hanging out with people. It's a lot different than having a conversation face to face. And I actually read this quote from our book to my grandmother. It's on page 176, and it states, "That moment when another human being listened to so attentively and compassionately that we felt liberated to bare our souls." And she was like, that is so true, because when you're in a conversation and you feel like somebody's actually paying attention to you and listening to you, it feels like you're like reading their soul, kind of uh like if you're really into the conversation, then it'll show. Like you'll be able to know, rather than if somebody is just like gazing off or making that eye contact, but then their brain isn't really like there, so they're kind of like drifting. Like you can always tell. Another part of our conversation led me to ask her about emotion, because we were just talking about a bunch of stuff and I wanted to get her opinion on it. She explained to me that she thinks that our generation is a lot more sensitive than hers, and she believes that like our emotions can get in the way of how we do things, which I actually agree. Having conversations can be really important, and the reason that I agree with what she said was because I feel like nowadays you really can't have not all the time, but a lot of the times you can't really have a normal conversation without somebody's feelings getting hurt or emotions that maybe shouldn't have came out were shown, or somebody was a little bit too sensitive, something like that. I feel like nowadays it's really hard to have even just like a basic conversation because something like that can come into the way. And she was also saying that she feels that our generation compared to hers may not know how to express their feelings and emotions in the correct way or in a better way than how we do it today. And actually in our book on page 95, so it states that our emotional reactions are usually meant to be long or short term, but she was feeling that nowadays we tend to make them long term, which I also agree with, because I feel like things can get dragged along long term when they really shouldn't be. They should just be like portrayed in the right way. Like even though not everybody takes this class, so they might not know how to properly show their emotions, which is why I actually think this class is like good, and I think that everybody should take this class. But yeah, it just states that they're usually short term, but she was feeling how we actually tend to make them more long term, which can lead to more emotions in the long run. So my opinion and like overall what I took from speaking with her was just how different our generations are and how we communicate. Just in our one-on-one conversation, it was just so different. I feel like her generation is very good at active listening. Like they will sit there and listen to you. They will make sure that they are giving signals to make it known that they are listening. And I feel like a lot of times nowadays I have to be like, hey, snap out of it, like I'm talking to you, or like, hey, are you listening, to somebody that I would talk to that's in my generation. On page 183 in our book, it talks about the back channel cues, and she used them the entire time we were talking. Like, even if I was asking a question and she was responding, and then when I was ready to talk back to her, she was engaging in it the whole time. And back channel cues are verbal and nonverbal behaviors in a conversation, like saying yeah or okay or head nodding or saying no, like things like that, showing that you're engaging in the conversation and you're actually listening. Because if you're not actually listening, you're not going to catch those little pieces in there where you should be saying like yeah, like okay, like I understand, stuff like that. So how I will take this into further generations is that I'm actually having a baby in 3 weeks, and it's going to be very important to me to make sure that my daughter knows how to communicate and knows how to show her feelings and emotions in the proper ways. And I also want to make sure that if she is having a conversation with somebody, that she's not just acting like she doesn't care, like she's actually involved in the conversation. Because this could affect maybe her getting a job one day. Like if you're sitting in an interview and you're just dazing off and you're not listening to any of the questions that you're being asked, you're probably not going to get that job, because they want somebody that can, simply just sit down and have an interview or a conversation. And if you can't do that, you probably won't get the job, depending on what the job is, though. But I do believe that my current generation struggles with communication, so that's why it's really important to me to make sure that our daughter knows the proper ways. Everything that I've been learning in this class, I want to keep with me forever. I want to also make sure that I'm keeping my eyes open to being an active listener overall. That's like my favorite thing that we've talked about so far in this class. Just because having the conversation with my grandmother showed me like how enjoyable it is to have a conversation with somebody who's actively listening to everything you're saying. And I want to make sure that when people are speaking to me, they feel the same way.